On behalf of Streaming Media and our fellow panelists, welcome to today's discussion. We're going to talk about choice and whether or not having too much of it is really no choice at all. Really what consumers want in this era of peak television. We'll spend the next hour covering what consumers are watching, why, and in a world with so many options, how creators, how providers, how others can really break through. And I'm joined by a stellar group of panelists today from across the industry. We've got Randa Minkarah from Resonance AI, Sherry Brennan, an independent consultant who's formerly with Fox, and Ali Hodjat from Intertrust. I'm going to start by doing a quick introduction of myself before handing off to the panelists. And my background is that I'm with Altman, Vilandrie and Company. We're a strategy consulting firm that serves telecom, media, and technology companies as well as investors. Within the media space, we cover quite a large range of clients, from traditional media to video. And within the video space, we're serving studios, cable and broadcast networks, traditional distributors, direct-to-consumer services, the technology companies that support them, and pretty much everywhere in between and in combination. Our work tends to be strategic in nature, identifying and prioritizing revenue and growth opportunities. That can be new content, new products, new business and distribution models, and for many of our legacy companies, when and how to make a shift in their business. Before I hand off the mic, I did want to just make one final plug, and that is that we'll be sharing some data today from self-funded research that we do throughout the year. We fund this research to generate proprietary data on consumer behavior and how to think about interest in and willingness to pay for content and other forms of media. In a space with varying levels of data availability and analysis, we try to bring unique data and perspectives to our clients. And so with that preamble behind us, let's focus on getting to know our panelists. Randa, can you maybe start off by giving the audience an overview of your background, talk a little bit about Resonance AI, and maybe leave us with some thoughts on what life has been like during COVID, and maybe a funny or interesting anecdote from the last, call it 3 months. Randa, you're on mute.
Yes, I am. I didn't realize I was muted. Thank you. Thanks, Matt. Resonance AI is a Seattle-based startup, and we've been in business working on a platform for 6 years. And what we've done is we've brought AI specifically in a platform to help content owners increase audience, which is the desire of anybody making original content. And we serve broadcasters, studios, networks, etc., new media, irrespective of where you are. If you have content, you want to grow your audience, that is what our platform does. With so much data and so much opportunity now to start to make data-driven decisions, you see Amazon and Netflix already have that sort of in their DNA. We want to bring that to everyone. So I think of it as democratizing data and using it well to make informed and creative decisions to grow your audience. So that's a little bit about Resonance AI. So my background is primarily media and now obviously technology. Prior to this, I was a senior vice president of revenue and business development for a company called Fisher Communications. It was acquired several years ago, which gave me the opportunity to start the company. While I was there, I ran the digital division directly, and I handled all revenues for the company, radio, television, and of course, obviously, the digital division. I bought programming for our group, and I handled distribution and retransmission consent. So it was broad.
Excellent. Any comments related to what life has been like during COVID, and do you have any funny stories you want to share?
Well, I mean, I have a story that I think is pretty funny.
Okay,
what I decided to do was work on my pantry. And so I started digging through it. And 2 nights ago, I had a new dish that I served everyone for dinner. And I called it Old Bean Chili. And so my husband looks at me and goes, "What makes this Old Bean? It's Old Bean white chili. I don't get it." It was really, really, really expired beans I found in the back of the pantry, and I used them, and they were fine. The can wasn't bulging. So I've done a bunch of this. I've slipped in, some old escargot I served as appetizers once. It was 10 years old, at least.
Okay. That's awesome. Thanks, Randa. Sherry, over to you. If you could maybe just talk a little bit about your background, what you're doing these days, and then some interesting thoughts on what's life's been like in COVID.
Sure. Thanks, Matt. So I've got about a 30-year background in the pay television business. I started off working on the cable TV operator side, worked for a company in LA called Falcon Cable TV, which some people may remember. Now that's been incorporated into the Altice world mostly. And then I worked for Cablevision in New York. And while I was there, I really got into the sort of emerging technology at the time, which was video on demand and sort of some semblances of interactive TV. And that really ended up directing my career because it was so interesting to me, and a great intersection between technology, which I'm interested in, and video and business, and how to get people to, sort of watch more TV, I guess. When I moved back to LA in 2004, I started working at Fox Networks in Los Angeles. And I was there for almost 15 years until last year's Disney sale. And while I was there, I worked in the distribution group and focused on new entrants. So a lot of these OTT services that we'll talk about today came across my radar. Anybody who wanted to license Fox's content for that space needed to convince me that it was a good idea, essentially. And there were a lot of interesting ideas I heard that either we weren't really ready to provide content into that business model, or that I just didn't think would actually survive and weren't viable. So it's really, really fascinating. I also helped when Hulu was nascent and launching, and worked on Fox's ownership interest in Hulu until I left last year. So it's been a really interesting time to be in this business. I've seen it go from 40 channels of analog cable to 400 channels of digital cable and 400 SVOD services. So it's been really fascinating. Since I left Fox last year, I have become a consultant and a strategic advisor. I have about 7 clients right now, and I work on helping companies like Randa's develop their products and services and respond to the changing market conditions. So it's been a really interesting year again, and I feel really fortunate to have had the opportunity to kind of reinvent my career and use my background to help smaller companies get going in this industry. So a lot of fun. In terms of the current circumstances, it's been an interesting couple of months. I like to say that it's sort of Little House on the Prairie at my house these days. I've been, as everyone, baking and cooking a lot. I've somehow decided to take up crochet, and I'm now making a blanket, which I think my son will probably leave in the closet when he goes away to school this fall. But, I have to, as a mother, make him a blanket. Of
course.
So it's been fun. And honestly, I'm really fortunate because I pretty much work at home these days anyway. And so my life hasn't really changed that much. I planted a garden, which has been fun. And like I said, doing a lot of home-based stuff. And then, of course, in the last week, been attending some protest marches and also helping with neighborhood cleanup. Here in LA, we've had quite a lot going on in that. So it's been eye-opening and, kind of disheartening on the one hand, but also a lot of beautiful neighborhood interactions with people coming out both to protest and also to help clean up. So what a time we're living through on every front.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing, Sherry. All right, Ali, you're up next. If you could just give us a bit of your background and talk about Intertrust.
Yes, that sounds good. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be on this panel. My background is mainly related to content protection and anti-piracy. I have over 15 years experience looking after product management and marketing for content protection, whether it was broadcast TV, OTT streaming, or MVPD services. I've started by 6 years at Broadcom, focusing on SoCs for set-top boxes and OTT streaming devices, where I managed the conditional access and DRM certifications. And then I moved on to Verimatrix, worked for 7 years again, focused on CAS, DRM, and anti-piracy products. I'm currently responsible for product marketing at Intertrust Technologies, focusing on media and entertainment product and services. Intertrust actually it's a technology company that provides security solutions focused on not only content protection and anti-piracy, but also tamper-resistant software solutions and managed PKI services. In terms of media and streaming services, basically the offering is a cloud-based multi-DRM platform an anti-piracy service under the brand name called ExpressPlay. And it has shown a proven scalability for a lot of largest streaming platforms globally. So again, I'm excited to be here. In terms of adjusting to the life in COVID, so I think a lot of people resonate on having kids around and being able to work from home when kids are home. Obviously, I have been working from home for many years, but what had changed is when I was in a really important conference call, video chat, and suddenly see my 5-year-old standing behind me, waiting patiently until I stop talking and then ask for ice cream. So this happened a few times, and then I quickly learned the best way to manage my work schedule was really having the kids watch some streaming platforms while I'm on an important conference call. And that actually, I think, helped to increase the number of OTT viewing during pandemic.
You're single-handedly doing it, Ali. That's awesome. I think what many of my friends have asked is, if you're so focused on media, like, what are you watching during COVID? What would you recommend to me? And for the most part, we've been largely catching up on shows. I'd say that we're big into Top Chef, so we've been catching up on the new season, and as well as watching some of the old ones. I really liked the documentary Last Dance on Netflix with no sports being aired. It was kind of nice to get a little bit of that in my life. We watched Ozark when it came out almost immediately, but honestly, it's been kind of hard because there's not as much time as we have being at home. I feel like I'm as busy now as I have ever been in my life. So, Randa, what have you been watching? What do you recommend to the audience?
Well, I absolutely love Ozark, and if you haven't watched it, you absolutely must. I'm looking forward to Babysitter's Club starting. That's going to be on Netflix, so that is cool. And I'm just going to confess that I've been watching Contagion and 12 Monkeys, like monthly. Okay. So I don't know. It's sort of, Contagion is what happened. The thing that I haven't watched that I'm dying to watch is CBS All Access, a new Star Trek show. I'm actually, waiting to put that in the queue and watch that, and watching a few things on Hulu. I have not watched Normal People, but I have heard great things about Normal People. And I agree with you. There hasn't been as much time as I would have thought to watch as much as I want.
Yeah, I totally agree. Sherry, what have you been watching? Anything good?
Well, yes, of course. There's tons of stuff to watch. Actually, I have a friend who a few weeks ago was saying she finished Netflix, and I thought that was pretty funny. I don't know how you could do that. Like you, I'm actually busier than I've ever been. I think between having a lot going on the work front and also having, honestly, to clean my own house for the first time. I know that sounds horrible, but the fact of the matter is I've had a cleaning person for many years and didn't feel comfortable with that during this pandemic. So that's given me an opportunity to teach my teenage son how to clean a bathroom, which is, a good life skill to have, I think. So I've been watching that, which is fun. But a couple shows I've enjoyed recently. One is called Upload, that's on Amazon Prime, I think, which is about people having an afterlife after they die and being uploaded into some virtual reality. That was kind of an interesting idea to me, and pretty good show. I liked it. And then another one I really enjoyed is kind of a quirky comedy called Afterlife with Ricky Gervais. Mm-hmm. That one's about a guy whose wife was his best friend and has passed away, and it's how he's dealing with his grief in a sort of a bitter British comedic way. So it's pretty funny to me. Not everybody's cup of tea. Yeah,
of course. And Ali, sounds like there's probably a plethora of children's content aired in the household, but what else?
Yeah, I mean, we sign up for Disney Plus as well during this time. But I mean, because of the work schedule, we always also use the prime time and evening for watching guest spots, and obviously a lot of news that during the first few weeks. But what I really recommend and I really loved so much was Money Heist on Netflix. It was very well made. Narcos Mexico was another series we watched. Ozark as well. I mean, I totally agree with you. I mean, there's a lot of good content out there. There is a lot of good original series. So, yeah.
All right. Well, one thing I wanted to do is just, as I had mentioned before, share a little bit about the unique and interesting data that we have at Altman Vilandrie. And so Every year we do a consumer video survey. We look to understand consumer preferences and content and what really drives it. What you've got here on your screen is, the favorite programs from our respondent pool. So we asked them, of roughly 250, what are your most favorite or most interesting programs? And what you can see here is all those 250, the percentages of respondents who said, yeah, I must have, or this is a favorite for me. And what's interesting is you kind of see quite a bit of live news and sports at the top, followed by a number of pay TV and SVOD exclusives that most of us have heard about or have likely watched. But what I think is really interesting is when you then do a double click and say, of the top 30 programs, let's look by age group, 18 to 24, 25 to 34, 35 plus. You can see a lot of differences in what consumers are actually watching. The programs that are highlighted in yellow are not actually they're not actually on any of the other lists. So one of the immediate things that strikes me is, it's probably and is very hard to create a service where I have enough content on to appeal to everyone. Mm-hmm. So I guess I would just open it up and Sherry, any initial thoughts on this data?
Well, I'd love to see how it changed. I know it takes a while to compile this, but I'd love to see how it changed during the pandemic, because I have a feeling, obviously the sports is going to fall off. And I have a feeling that you'd see more SVOD exclusive content rise to the top recently, since I think, there's a lot of evidence that people are turning to that content. And obviously people are watching more content during the day than they have been accustomed to in the past. So I'd be super curious about that. I think most of this is fairly intuitive. I think it probably matches Nielsen ratings to some degree. So, we know that sports and news get lots of live viewing, and so that's not such a surprise. But yeah, I think this is pretty much what I would expect, and it kind of explains, I guess, some of the content that we see being produced in the SVOD world is trying to mimic some of the content that shows up in the dark blue here.
Yep, absolutely. So I guess kind of one of the initial things that I had, once the pandemic started, I had really gotten on the news train and was watching as much news, live, local, national. I was reading online. For me, probably halfway through the pandemic, really started to wane off. I just kind of got exhausted by everything I was hearing. So I guess I'd just be interested, Sherry, what about you? Has your news consumption gone up during COVID or down? Like, how have you been handling that in terms of the content that you've been watching?
Well, I'm probably not the best person to ask this, because I'm not an avid news consumer to begin with, because I find it a little depressing. And certainly that's been the case through this. I have watched press conferences of the governor of California, the mayor of LA, and also the governor of New York, who I've found quite enlightening. So I've been watching that, and that's been pretty consistent, although yeah, it probably has waned a bit. And then of course, this past week, I've watched more news than ever, because I've been trying to keep up with what's happening around the country and in my city with respect to protesting and mayhem.
Yep. Randa, how about you? How has news been a part of your life?
Well, I have to admit that I am a self-confessed news junkie. So I like news in the first place, and but it's I would say doubled and tripled in volume. And I agree with Sherry that the biggest change has been the daytime viewing. But I switch through every station, local station, and watch a lot of cable news as well. I do think that, one of the things that we do is analyze newscasts. And in seeing that, we're able to detect when COVID first began to catch the interest of the public, and then through the audience analytics, noticing when suddenly it did wane for people. It's absolutely true. And then of course, now we have a different situation in the country, and you see that interest peaking. So, we get with intense examination, you can literally see when it's, as a newscaster, as an owner, as a producer, when it's time to sort of shift a little bit and know when there's waning interest or gaining momentum. So when a topic is about to go viral.
Very interesting. So stepping back and thinking about kind of all that content that we're watching and broader kind of US population, like how do you watch content and what are the platforms that you're subscribing to? Maybe Ali, if you want to start there.
Sure, yeah. So I'm subscribed to Netflix, Hulu Live, Disney Plus, and Amazon Prime. So we mainly watch live TV on Hulu Live. Also, like basically all the sporting I used to watch, for example, English Premier League soccer games every Saturday, Sunday morning live on NBC Sports, or NBA games on ESPN or TNT. So again, focusing on Hulu Live has been mainly for news and sports. And then we used Amazon and Netflix for SVOD services. And for the most part, the original series. And I mean, we talked about kids watching Netflix, Disney Plus. It was interesting that the kids watched it for a couple of weeks. And then after that, there was not much interest. They're spending more time on Netflix these days.
Interesting. Randa, how about you? What do you use to watch content?
Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu, soon to have Peacock, because I'm looking at this through the veil of Comcast, if you will, who has aggregated access to those apps and made search much easier for us and quicker.
Okay.
So that has been a big change and something I've really enjoyed to see them starting to bring that in. We watch a ton of content, and you know, that I'm just a content junkie as well, just from buying programming. I had to watch everything. I really did need to watch as much as possible, because we were programming not just for ABC affiliates, et cetera, but also for my networks that had a big block of time that I needed to fill in and understand. So the streaming services are just indispensable in our household, and the new water cooler, right? It's what we talk about with our friends. You know, what is new? What are you watching? What is happening? It's that shared experience that we all desperately need right now. And that's what we're using to open conversations and communicate with people.
Absolutely. And Sherry, how many are you subscribing to? What are you using to watch?
I've got 8 subscriptions to SVOD services. So it's a lot. And I also have a cable TV package that has all the premium networks in it. And I watch a couple of AVOD services as well. So there's a lot of choice in my household. I'm not a huge viewer in terms of the number of hours, or at least I didn't used to be. I think I used to be out more in the evenings. Of course, these days I'm home more in the evening, so I am watching more TV than I used to. And a couple interesting things, I guess, I think. I got CBS All Access because there was one show on CBS that I wanted to watch ad-free, right? And I still have it, even though that show's not on anymore. So that's one where I'm sitting here thinking, well, do I really want to keep that? I'm not sure. I think those kind of services are really susceptible to churn when people, excuse me, like me, come in, for a particular program. I also used my desire to donate to public television to purchase a subscription to the PBS Passport service. I happen to like a lot of the content they have on PBS. So for me, that's a good option and a good way to both donate, which is important to me, and also to have access to content. I've got the big 3. I also have HBO Max, Disney Plus, Apple TV. So I've got a lot of choice there, and I'm not sure, honestly, how long I'm going to keep all those options, but I definitely, being in the business, wanted to have access to them for a period of time so that I could comment about the UI or the content mix and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think I'm at roughly 6 or 7, pay TV, the big 3, Disney Plus, HBO Max. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure what I would cut, and just being so focused on me, I think probably what I would likely do is just manage the inactivity. So when there is, 1 or 2 shows on one of those platforms, like you said, Sherry, if I wasn't in media, I'd probably try to do a better job of turning it on and off based on, what was in market at the time. But I mean, I think the bigger question for me is how many services, where's the ceiling? Right now, I think the average is probably somewhere between 2 and 3, but Ali, I think you said 4, Randa 5, Sherry's at 8, I'm at 6 or 7, right? I mean, are we just big content junkies, and like, where does everyone else fall, and where do you think the ceiling might be?
I think depending on the age group, this is varies actually from 2 to 3 services all the way to 5, 6, as you mentioned. Just recently, I actually saw a report from S&P Global. It was on a webinar that they broke down the data, based on 2 factors, one being the generation or age and the other being the income level. And it was interesting to me because they actually broke it down into 3 different categories. One being the boomers and seniors, the other one being Gen X, and the other one millennial and Gen Z. And for each category, breaking down between low, medium, and high income families. And so it was very clearly showing that basically in the senior category, the maximum was 2. It was between 1 or 2 SWAT services. And when it was looking at Gen X, it was varying between 2 and 3 services, depending on the income level. And with Gen Z and millennials, it was starting from 4, going for 5 and 5. And I mean, you mentioned 6. So again, depending on income level, I think it really depends on that age. Obviously, for seniors, they usually are subscribed to some sort of a linear TV and MVPD service. So in that case, 1 or 2 maybe services, SWAT services is doing the job. And obviously the cost might be an important factor. When it comes to Gen Z and millennials, the point being that they don't have any live TV service for sure. And that's why I think the range of 4 or 5 services is very typical with them.
Randa, any thoughts here?
Yeah, I think it's going to settle in around 3. And I do agree that the number of services and the service choice is going to depend on the age of the household and the income level to an extent. However, I think that if you have a premium cable service where you've got HBO already and you've got Showtime and et cetera, you're gonna settle in around 3. It's hard to watch that much more television. And I think at the end of the day, what is going to help consumers make the decision is how deep the library is and how often that content is being refreshed with content that is buzzworthy.
Sherry, thoughts?
Yeah, I think actually I would put my money on a higher number than 3. I think that to the extent content continues to be so widely distributed across such a large number of services, consumers are going to continue to want access to more of them. I think money is a factor. So of course, at a lower income level, people will constrain their choices. But if you include the AVOD services in the mix, I think that people are going to be accessing, as many of those as they feel they need to find content they want to watch. Nobody's mentioned YouTube yet, including me. But I think for young people, like my son is 15, he would consider YouTube an AVOD service for, he asked me yesterday, we were looking for something to watch while we were having dinner. And he said, well, can we turn on YouTube and watch all the episodes of a particular YouTube creator that he likes? And I said no, because I didn't want to watch that particular content, right? But for him, that is something that is a naturally occurring thought. To me, it isn't. I don't think of YouTube as a place to go to watch what I consider to be TV, but he does.
Right.
So I think that's one where I don't even know how you classify that. Is that one service or is that a million services, right? And I do think we're going to start to see bundling happen with AVOD, SVOD, and other digital services. I think that is going to be something that happens, and that people won't necessarily think about how many they're subscribing to or accessing for content. They will go to an aggregator and they will start there and look for content that they care about, as opposed to looking just at Netflix or just at Hulu or et cetera.
Well, I definitely want to get to aggregation, content discovery, search and discovery, and all the reasons why. But before we do that, I just want to round out in a few topics related to COVID. So, one of the things that we've been hearing a lot about is that OTT viewing in particular has been really spiking. And there's been a surge in viewing over the last, call it 3 months. I'd be interested, Ali, if you had some thoughts on just what that has meant for performance. Like, have the networks that we've been using to watch OTT been able to handle it?
Yes, so no, this is the important question. I want to have actually this response to that, especially focusing on the security, the impact of how content protection is impacting the performance of OTT services. The recent numbers I've seen was about 9% increase in number of subscriptions. and like about 8% increase in revenue. I mean, obviously, we all agree. I think this has given a great opportunity for streaming service operators to take market share from linear TV, pay TV services. What we have seen in Intertrust, specifically focused on the number of DRM licenses that we deliver, we have seen really a spikes. And like, for example, in one of our tier 1 customers, we saw 16% increase from February to March and another 5% from March to April. So again, that is really important because when you look at this number of subscribers increase and number of viewing increases, each content is encrypted, protected, delivery of the DRM licenses, and now we're talking about additional 50, 60 million subscribers or viewings happening every month over month. This is really impacting the performance of the backend system. So obviously one factor that you've mentioned is the traffic on the internet. But again, delivering the DRM licenses robustly and in a scale, and be prepared to instantly scale it up during these events that there's the conference news and everybody watching that live is important. Another factor is really about the viewing experience. So when you look at the low latency streaming, and as the subscribers are really used to how they watch the content, how there's not much buffering and the DRM licenses are delivered instantly and robustly to manage the low latency streaming, this has to be maintained again during this tough time. And so again, the product teams are really focusing on making sure there is a DRM license delivery performance, meeting the peak demand, as well as managing the low latency streaming in the same way that quality of experience for the users during this streaming surge stays the same.
Thank you. I just want to maybe talk a little bit about that bump from COVID. Sherry, do you think it's going to remain, and why or why not? And what have you seen OTT services been doing to kind of retain, or what do you think they will do to retain customers post-COVID?
First of all, I certainly hope that the bump does not remain, because if it does, that means we're all stuck at home. So
good point.
But I do think, to Ali's point, there's probably a shift in market share, and I believe that will be retained. People are discovering new services to some degree, discovering new shows they want to follow. And so I do think that will probably continue. I think that was a natural and inevitable evolution anyway. And I think this probably just accelerated it, that people are becoming more aware of having more choice. I do think with more choice comes a little bit of paralysis. And so, that's where brand matters, and that's where knowing what to expect when you go into a particular service is going to matter. I think there's an opportunity in that space for niche services that you're starting to see grow a little bit more, to harvest smaller but dedicated and loyal and less churn, audiences.
Yep, totally agree. And Randa, any thoughts here?
Yeah, I do agree with Sherry that the bump will decline. First of all, as soon as we're allowed out of our houses, I think the doors will be thrown open and people will run out, but they will come back at night for their entertainment. The new launches, all of these new launches are going to allow people to sample, and they're going to sample. And so it's keeping them that's going to be the trick, right? The brand will bring him in, the name will bring him in, the library will bring him in. It's the keeping that's going to end up being the long-term play. And I think that, the higher level streaming will remain and the cord cutting will remain. As a shorter answer, I do think that cord cutting is going to continue, and it's even more facilitated by all of these launches.
Ali, quick question about piracy. Does the surge in OTT streaming, how has that been impacting what you're seeing on the piracy side of things?
This is a good question. So obviously piracy is an important issue which is impacting revenue for all the services. I think a recent report from ABI Research was estimating that today 17% of worldwide streamings is actually using content illegally. Before pandemic, there was a lot of focus on live sports piracy. Obviously that has stopped. So the piracy has kind of shifted towards more movies and premium TVs these days. Although as you see the sporting events starting, even without any fans in the stadium, again, the content will be played live and the piracy will go back to the same level they were. One thing that I saw recently was from a piracy infringement tracking company called Muso, and they were actually saying there was 36% increase in average daily torrent downloads. So again, shifting more towards the premium movies and TV series. So what's happening really is about all the OTT streaming service providers are in some form looking at different ways that they can stop piracy or combat piracy. They're looking at different technologies like forensic watermarking and fingerprinting that will enable to identify the piracy on the web. And so in some form, they're either assessing technically the deployment cost or scalability or time to market factors related to implementing these technologies. And again, the anti-piracy market is significant, I think. ABI Research was estimating 10% of revenue of total content security market is going through the anti-piracy specific solution. So again, that's another important factor to talk about.
I guess one follow-up question is, to what extent do you think the spike in piracy is just an issue of being able to find, or like search and discovery? Like it's much easier for me to get a program through an illegal site than it is to try to figure out which service it's on that I already subscribe to.
That's true, and that's one of the issues that the anti-piracy companies need to solve. I mean, we always talk about how to stop pirate services, but finding them is another thing. And as you see, the users find the pirated content easier than finding it from the regular services. And I mean, looking at that, I mean, we're going to talk about content discovery in the legal services, obviously, but you know, the aggregation of all these different services coming in a pirate size would enable easier for subscribers to find what they want to watch I mean, even through piracy sites. And that's something that I think is important for the piracy companies to look into and solve that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sherry, I want to double back to a point that you were talking about before, which is this paralysis, right? Is it real? I guess one anecdote from the past weekend for me is, you know, we had gotten takeout and we were sitting down trying to figure out, okay, Friday night, let's watch a movie. And so, you know, we're starting to eat our food and we're thinking, oh, okay, well, what do we want to watch? So we go online, look at all the top lists, you know, movies you haven't seen, what should you be watching? It was real. I think we must have spent like 30 minutes trying to like take a bite, figure out what to watch, take a bite. It was a paralyzing experience. So I guess just Ali, you know, just to start off with you, like, why is it so darn hard to watch or to find something to watch? You know, do you think that paralysis is real?
I mean, I think there are different ways to look at it. It depends on the type of content. Like, yes, on the SWAT services, I mean, there are different original series and the recommendation sometimes is not really making sense. I mean, people have some kind of their favorite genres and they try to follow that when they're subscribed to a specific service. But again, going across different platforms, it might be hard. I think looking at it from the sports side, I think subscribers know what they want to watch, but the problem is really what platforms or how many platforms they have to subscribe to in order to be able to watch all the contents they want. In many cases, you know, if they want to watch NHL, NBA, let's say, you know, all the different international soccer games, NFL and so on, the subscription price becomes really, really high. And so that's not really manageable. And so that's another niche that people need to look at. I mean, that's kind of my 2 cents in this topic.
Thank you, Ali. So, you know, thoughts are like time of day, maybe the mood you're in, like your commitment to a show. Randa, I'd be interested to hear what you're thinking about in terms of, you know, why it's so hard to choose something to watch.
It depends on who you're in the room with. It really has a big effect. If you're there alone, it's simpler. The more people in the room, the harder it is to come to a decision. You know, does mood matter? Does time of day matter? Yes, I think they're all factors, but I think the biggest factor is how many folks are in the room and how many services do you have? And I think there's going to be natural stratification based on how the families or the households look at what the content is. So Disney, perfect for kids, right? You can keep watching the same stuff over and over. I love doing that. I've watched Monsters Inc. and Shrek countless times. And so that's one way of helping stratify it. And then when you think about movies, HBO Max, I think by far and away has the most movies, but Netflix has that long, deep library. And so you start to have the conversation around what it is you want to find. And that's how curation is largely happening today. It's too hard to search.
Yeah, absolutely. Sherry, any thoughts here?
Yeah, I think this is an opportunity for the sort of aggregator platforms I was talking about earlier, to be able to offer cross-service search and discovery. Right now, you have to go into a service, and then that service has its own recommendation engine, which may or may not be great. It doesn't know, to Randa's point, it doesn't know whether you're by yourself or with other people. It just knows what you've watched before with whatever the account login is that you're using. So I actually think that there's a lot of improvements that could be made to recommendation engines to get a little more sophisticated. I don't think it's hard for, I sympathize with them because they don't have a way to know who's in the room, right? Unless you tell them. So I think that makes their job harder. But maybe there's a way that they can offer like recommended for Sherry only, recommended for Sherry and her son, or I don't know. I think there's work to be done there. And I do think this idea of a cross-service search and discovery through aggregation platform is a good idea, and will also introduce people to new services they might not have heard of before, because it'll be, you watched this on Netflix, you might like this on BritBox or something like that. I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Randa, I'd be interested in your thoughts. Like, why do you think that search and discovery is just so hard?
It's literally what Sherry said. You have to go in and out of the apps and then hope that you're being shown what makes sense for you. And the thing is, the less you use the app, the worse the recommendation becomes. So Netflix, for instance, has done a good job of at least saying who's in the room, whose account am I watching this with. But over time, I've only watched one particular genre on Netflix. So that's all they show me. So I don't want to know that. I want to understand, based on a broader view of my likes and interests in my household, what is it I really want to see? That's true curation. And I do think that within the apps themselves, there's a great deal of improvement that can be done, studying really deeply and closely the analytics around what is happening with content so that you can start to assign different genres. So it's not just going to be crime. What kind of crime? The more metadata that you can add to define your show to the nth degree, literally, will allow for greater audience segmentation, and then finally better recommendations, which is everyone's dream, that every service wants people to spend more time with their content. And that's the way to get there.
Yep. Sherry, I know we've talked about screen hits, TV, packet media. You know, what do you think about the various approaches out there? And I don't know if there are others that you think are top notch, but what do you think about what aggregators have been doing thus far?
Well, I think it's interesting. The main aggregators we've seen so far are either existing media companies like a Comcast, something like that, like what they're doing with Xfinity, where they've made a lot of different services available in one sort of destination. They are sort of the original, if you think about it, the original aggregators, right, for these kind of services. But somebody like a Packet is interesting because they're not part of that ecosystem. So they don't have skin in the game in terms of content creation or, trying to compete with the services that they're aggregating in terms of selling their own, say, SVOD service. So something like an Amazon Channels, where you see a lot of aggregation, is a little bit like wanting their finger in both pies. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So I think it will be interesting to see these sort of more independent ones emerge and get more popular with consumers, because really the consumer is first for them, and not they don't have any competing business interests. So I think that's going to be important, and I think that will actually be really helpful for the smaller services in particular, because they will have a marketplace that is a little bit more neutral, and that allows consumers to sort of be in the driver's seat.
Makes sense. So for all of us here speaking, where do you all go when you're not sure what you want to watch? Like for me, I kind of turn to, I guess, a combination of looking online for lists as well as looking at recommendations. Maybe I'll scroll through the program guide on pay TV. But Ali, I'd be interested to know, like, where are you going when you're not sure what to watch?
I'm still following word of mouth and like kind of recommendations coming through the same genre that I had been watching in the past. But there are a couple of two resources that are sometimes useful. IMDb for the content discovery is sometimes good because they cover movies across different platforms. And sometimes you easily can understand, is this something it's worthwhile to watch or not at all? And then I know some people actually read New York Times weekly newsletter about new movies. And that's good because, again, covering streaming series, original series on Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, HBO, Disney Plus. So it's, again, across different platforms and can, again, give you some ideas.
Randa,
thoughts here?
I definitely rely on New York Times that does, in not necessarily just the online, but there's a lot of curation that they do about what to watch this weekend, what to watch, which is great. I love Twitter. I love knowing what's trending on Twitter. Literally, it's a conversation in my house. My husband will say, "Hey, this show's getting a lot of buzz on Twitter." I'm like, "Yeah, let's do it." So for us, that's a pretty good source, along with friends, etc.
Sherry, quick question on these top lists and kind of word of mouth, and like what do you think of them? Why are they popular? Why is word of mouth such an important part of, and why is Twitter, which is essentially, digital word of mouth, so important?
Well, I think word of mouth is super important because, hearing from your friends that something has qualities that they know you would appreciate, I think is important. I was going to say one thing I don't really pay attention to is all the emails I get from the various services that I subscribe to. They often send me emails that say, here's what's coming up this weekend. I almost never even open those. So I don't know. I'm not sure why that is, honestly, because, for example, I used to, before the pandemic, I was a big reader. That's another topic. But I often will respond to those Amazon emails about books and buy a book that they recommend to me. But for some reason, I don't do the same thing with the emails from Netflix or Amazon or CBS or whomever in terms of what to watch. So I don't know if that's just me or if that's a normal sort of consumer response. But I think the recommendations within the services, to Randa's point, if you use the service a lot, are, they're pretty good. And so I think they need to iterate on that, but I don't really know why so many top 10 lists are important, other than just people need leadership. that provides it.
Yeah, it's with almost so much opportunity and so much choice, it's paralyzing. So having someone tell you this is worthwhile, this is worth your time, to me seems like a pretty compelling thing for consumers. So I just have one last thing to share related to our consumer video survey. And this is a question that we ask every year, which is, which form of video are you most likely to watch when you don't have a plan? And what we see is overall, it's roughly 50-50 between online video services and then live pay TV. One of the interesting things we find is a relationship between age and the service. So younger consumers, about 2/3 are going to an online video service, an OTT platform, when they're not sure what they want to watch. And conversely, consumers over the age of 55 are looking toward pay TV. So I guess the question, Ali, thinking about just kind of devices and streaming service operations, what is something like this? What is the impact here for those considerations?
Yes, no, one thing which is really sticks out is the type of devices that the younger generation versus the older generation use for watching content. Obviously, the older generation mainly rely on, the biggest screen TV in the house, but as you see the younger generation looking more at online options and OTT streaming, that means they want to watch the content on any type of device, whether it's on their PC browsers, different type of browsers, their all sorts of Android and iOS tablets and phones that are available. And that brings a challenge for the service providers, specifically looking at the content protection side, because the security supported and the DRM technology supported in each of these different devices are varying. And so the OTT service providers have no option by making sure that they manage the fragmentation of different OS types and different devices that come with the different native DRM technologies. And doing this in-house is really complicated. Managing the OS fragmentation and device fragmentation is not an easy task. And so this is why, like, most of the streaming service providers would be really benefiting from leveraging a cloud-based content protection service that actually manages the end-to-end security for the content going to all different type of devices. And that would enable technically a transparent and unified user experience across all the different type of devices that younger generation use. And that's important. Otherwise, there would be subscriber churn. It would be, technically frustration from younger generations if they cannot watch the content with the level of user experience that they expect.
Makes sense. All right, so with the last few minutes here, I did want to hit on one final topic, and while we've moved through quite a bit very quickly, and the last topic is just thinking about what drives initial watching as well as watching on a sustained basis. I was hoping that maybe Sherry and Randa, you could comment here. Maybe Sherry, you start with kind of initial watching, and then Randa, if you want to follow up on sustained.
Sure. So in thinking about this, I realized that for me, my perspective is that people start or try something either because they're curious. That could be because they heard about it from word of mouth, or they just bought a service, or they saw a billboard, but there's some curiosity factor there, or because it's something they already know and trust, and they are in the mood for comfort. So I think that's what gets people to tune in to a show,
Right.
whether it's live or on demand. And then, the degree to which that need is met, and either their curiosity becomes, I got to see what happens next, or their need for comfort is met because it is enough like something that they've seen before that they're happy with their choice. I think that's what moves them to kind of come in and give new things a try.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then Randa, I know we've talked quite a bit about resonance and all the great things that you're able to do there. That's part of the reason why I was interested in hearing your perspective on sustained basis, sustained viewing. What are the types of things that you think are driving sustained viewership, and does it matter kind of what type of content we're actually talking about?
To have a sustained viewer, you have to delight your customer, you have to delight your viewer, you have to delight the audience, and you have to bring them back. And different genres have different applications, but there is literally no substitute for great combinations of actors, directors, great writing. That's what really brings people back. Content truly is king. Yes, there's a great deal of content, and there's a great deal of buzz that drives sampling and testing. But what we know is the application of understanding, bringing together the elements inside the video itself, tying that with the actual performance of a device, second by second. You begin to understand how the audience truly is interested in your content, and you are absolutely able to make adjustments that continue to bring that loyal audience back. And when I say make adjustments, nothing crazy radical, but if you are moving from season to season and you are changing the approach in terms of the style of the video itself, if it becomes dark or too complicated, or people don't like your lead actor, or the characters just aren't gelling with each other, how do you make tweaks to that so that you come back to satisfying your audience? Those are all possible today using data, understanding the connection between the content itself, the music, the mood, the interaction, the style. All of that plays a part, and there is no substitute for great writing. I cannot say that enough. That's what really brings consumers back, is being delighted by your content.
And I guess just one quick follow-up, Randa. What are players, what are content owners and distributors doing to kind of think through how to answer that question, and maybe on a more analytical basis?
audience segmentation, very, very deep audience segmentation, understanding and defining it very differently than this is a device in this household and they watched, who, you don't know who precisely, but if it's going to be an iPad, you can pretty well assume it's a single user at a time, right? So when you string all of that together and you begin to do analysis and you can define demographics, not by 18 to 49, not by just that household and device, but stringing under just deeply, deeply, deeply looking at that audience and how they work, combined with intense metadata and understanding of defining that genre and that content. So you cannot do that as human beings watching it, right? There's just too much information. So you tie together the performance. Is this device binging it? Have they watched 3 in a row, 2 in a row? As we look across our library, what are the shows that are likely to have an audience watch 2 or 3 in a row? Which ones are they just dumping out after one episode and never coming back? Which ones are they rewatching? All of that is possible today with the data that media companies have. It's just pulling it together, bringing it all together, and then applying it.
Makes sense. Thank you for sharing. So we're at the top of the hour, and so what we thought we'd do is maybe answer a question or two. I know that we had a few on Quibi, and so I guess I'd be interested, Sherry, I know you have some thoughts on Quibi. Any you want to share here with the group? What do we think in terms about the near and long-term future for that service or services like it with more short-form content?
So I think there's certainly opportunity for short-form content to be widely viewed and adopted by consumers. We see that in YouTube all the time already, and in other places. I think a couple of things. I think the name Quibi is clever, but I'm not sure, I feel like it's almost too clever for its own good. I'm not sure consumers know what it means or need to know what it means. I know they've done some marketing around that, but I'm not sure in terms of the general marketplace, it's been super successful in getting people to watch. And I also think given the plethora of free short form content that's out there, it's kind of a hard business proposition to get people to sign up to pay for that. So I think they got to get more creative about free trials or partnerships with other brands that would give it to people for free, that sort of thing. And I think right now is also a hard time to get people to buy new stuff that they don't know much about. There's already a lot of new stuff that people know what the brand is, like HBO Max or Disney Plus. People know what those brands are. And those, I mean, Disney Plus isn't having a hard time, but I'm pretty sure HBO Max isn't going to get to the Disney Plus numbers anytime soon. And that one's a whole other ball of confusion. Just, I'm in the industry and I didn't realize I was going to have access to it. So I feel like that's a whole other problem. There's just a lot of communication issues, and there's so much out there that just communicating what the offers even are for consumers, I think is really, really hard right now. And I think that's where bundling, again, I keep coming back to this sort of aggregation. Maybe that's belying my cable TV background, but cable TV worked for a reason. It's a great value with a ton of content, something for everyone, for one price. It's easy to understand what you're buying. And I think that's the value of bundling. And I do think we're going to see a resurgence of bundling one way or another in the coming couple of years.
Absolutely. Well, I do want to say thank you to Anil, Christian, and August for sending over questions related to Quibi and HBO Max. Thank you very much for participating. It's great to hear from you all. So I guess with that, just wanted to say thank you to Streaming Media, to the panelists for joining me here today, to the audience for coming and listening to us speak. And on behalf of everyone, be well, be safe, and cheers to a better 2020.